collecting 1967 stuff since the day I left Fenway Park on October 1st, 1967, beginning with my ticket stub from that day. But more on that later. But in 1967, what the Red Sox did in 1967, the uniqueness of really what transpired was that in 1901, the American League was born, adding 8 teams, and they began competing as a major league against the National League. Baseball remained that way until 1961. And in 1961, the American League expanded to 10 teams. They added the Los Angeles Angels, and then they also added the Washington Senators. Now, the Washington Senators had been part of the original 8, but that year they moved to Minnesota to become the Twins. And in 1961, they added an expansion team, the Washington Senators. Today, we know them as the Texas Rangers. George Scott, Reggie Smith, who had been drafted out of the Twins organization. So there are a lot of young kids, and even though they were terrible in '64, and terrible in '65, and terrible again in 1966, they finished in 9th place out of the 10 teams. However, the only salvage of that year, there were 2 actually. One being they finished a half a game ahead of the 10th place New York Yankees. And then they also, the second half of the year, from the All-Star break on, they actually had played 2 games over 500. They were 43 and 41 for the latter half of 1966. Comes from a great Broadway play at the time that was running called The Man of La Mancha, which is the story of Don Quixote chasing windmills, written by Michael Cervantes back hundreds of years ago. And it was extremely popular, and its theme song was To Dream the Impossible Dream. Well, the Impossible Dream theme for the Red Sox was born a night in June when they were playing the Chicago White Sox in a game at Fenway Park, and it was a 0-0 game that went into the 11th inning. And at the top of the 11th inning, the White Sox scored a run and went ahead 1-0. And the Red Sox came up in the bottom of the 11th inning. First 2 guys went out, and then I believe it was Joe Foy or somebody walked, and Tony Canigliaro stepped up to the plate. Now, Tony Canigliaro, if you're a Red Sox fan that was around when Tony Canigliaro was around, all I have to say is Tony Canigliaro, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For those who were not there, it's really hard to describe, but Tony Canigliaro, I would say, if William Shakespeare were to come back today and march around the United States of America and watch some baseball games, and he said, I need a tragic figure. Give me a tragic hero to write about. 14 years old. We drove in. We had to go to, it was a Sunday, so we had to make sure we went to Mass. So we were at Mass in the middle of the night at the Arch Street Chapel in Boston. It was a very interesting thing for me, having never been wandering the streets of Boston in the middle of the night before. And we got in line. We were the 5th people in line for standing room tickets the next day. So we pulled into Fenway Park that day, and we kind of just found our little niche, and we stood and watched as this miracle began to unfold. They lost. It went down 2-0 in the beginning of the first inning on errors by George Scott and Kyle Yastrzemski, which was amazing because George Scott and Kyle Yastrzemski were 2 guys who won Gold Gloves that year. And then they were losing 2-0, and in the 5th inning, Jim Lomborg led off with a bunt single, and virtually all hell broke loose. That kind of kept me in tow because we were in standing room seats, so we were up in the back of the standing up in back of section 27, actually. But I did actually shimmied up a pipe, and I actually shimmied out onto the stanchions that were the support for the roof. And I was up there, and I get very excited when Lomborg bunted the ball and almost fell out. I mean, I slipped. And I got down, but Dad said, you're not going out there. But when everything kind of settled down, we made our way over. I went to the shortstop position where I gathered up some dirt, and I didn't want to tear up the field, but I did go behind the mound, and I got a few sort of speckles of grass, and that stuff sat on my dresser for about 12 years.